It started like any ordinary day. I was sitting in our cozy living room, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, when I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. It was late past midnight, but I knew it had to be her. My wife, Amy, had been on a business trip for the last 3 days. The trip itself was nothing unusual. Her job often required her to travel. What was unusual, however, was the overly chipper tone in her texts. This time around, the door swung open, and there she was, standing in the doorway with her suitcase in one hand and her phone in the other. Her face was beaming with the kind of joy I hadn't seen in a long time. She was laughing about something, probably a joke or a message on her phone. For a moment, I thought she might have just had a really great trip, maybe a productive e-meeting or some good news from her boss. I almost smiled, glad to see her in such high spirits. "Hey hon, why?" she said, her voice bubbly. She kicked off her heels and set her suitcase by the door. "You won't believe how crazy this trip was. The meetings were endless, but we nailed the presentation. It's going to be huge for the company." I nodded and gave her a small smile. "That's great, Amy. Sounds like it went well." "It did," she said, still grinning, as she pulled out her phone and started typing something. "Oh, and the food at this place they took us to, unreal, like Michelle and Star, unreal." I watched her as she rambled on, noticing the glow on her face. There was something different about her, something I couldn't quite put my anger on her energy was almost too much. And then there was her laugh. She kept giggling at her phone, a kind of carefree laugh I hadn't heard in years. For a split second, I felt a pang of jealousy, not because she was happy, but because I hadn't been the one to make her feel that way. I stood up and walked over to her, giving her a light hug. "You seem really happy." "Why?" I said, half joking. "Maybe I should send you on more business trips." She laughed again, but it sounded nervous this time. "Yeah, maybe," she said, pulling away to grab her suitcase. "I'm just going to unpack really quick." As she walked toward our bedroom, something inside me felt off. Maybe it was the way she avoided looking me in the eye, or how she clutched her phone like it held some kind of secret. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her excitement than a successful business trip. When she disappeared into the bedroom, I stayed behind in the living room, staring at the empty doorway. When I noticed something strange. Her laughter had stopped. In fact, the entire house had gone eerily quiet. Curiosity got the better of me, and I made my way toward the bedroom, my footsteps silent on the carpet. As I reached the door, I heard her muttering under her breath. No, she whispered, with her voice panic. "Ed, this can't be happening, not now." I peeked inside and saw her sitting on the edge of the bed, her suitcase open in front of her. She was holding something in her hands, a piece of paper, and her face had gone pale. Her earlier smile had completely vanished, replaced by an expression of sheer panic. Her hands were shaking as she stared at whatever it was she had found in her suitcase. "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping into the room. She jumped at the sound of my voice, quickly shoving the paper back into her suitcase. "Nothing," she said, forcing a laugh that didn't match the fear in her eyes. Just work stuff." I raised an eyebrow. "Work stuff? You look like you've seen a ghost." She shook her head, closing the suitcase with a loud snap. She said, standing up and brushing past me. "I'm just tired. I'll tell you about it tomorrow, okay?" Before I could say anything else, she was out of the room and heading toward the bathroom. The door slammed shut, and I was left standing there, confused and more suspicious than ever. Something wasn't right. My gut was screaming at me that she was hiding something, and I knew I wouldn't be able to rest until I found out what it was. So I did the one thing I never thought I'd do. I waited until she was in the shower, and then I opened her suitcase, what I found inside made my blood run cold. I hesitated, ated for a moment, staring at the suitcase as if it were Panda A's box. My heart was racing, and my hands felt clammy, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know, what was she so desperate, to hide slowly. I unzipped the suitcase and lifted the lid. At RST glance it looked like any normal travel bag, clothes, toiletries, some folded papers, but as I dug deeper, I uncovered something that made my stomach twist. There was a neatly wrapped gift box, tied with a red ribbon, sitting underneath her clothes. It was Auntie Ada's to me. In fact, there was no name on it at all, but the size and shape of the box instantly made me uneasy. It was too personal, too intimate. I opened it carefully, my hands trembling. Inside was a sleek, black lingerie set, far more provocative than anything she'd ever worn for me. My mind raised with questions. Why would she pack something like this for a business trip? And more importantly, why had Auntie I known about it? Then I noticed a small card tucked into the folds of the fabric. My heart sank as I read the words scrawled across it in her handwriting. For when we're nearly alone, my chest tightened, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. It was undeniable now. This wasn't just some innocent oversight. This was evidence. Proof that my wife had been lying to me. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the card in my hand, as 1,000 thoughts oded my mind. Who was it? Someone from her OCE, someone she'd met on this trip. I wanted answers, but I knew I couldn't confront her without more information. If I came at her now, she'd just deny everything. I needed to be smart about this. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, zipping the suitcase shut and placing it back where she'd left it. Then I grabbed my phone and opened the browser, searching for any signs of unusual activity. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely type, but I managed to log in to our Shah-Ed phone account. What I found only deepened the pit in my stomach. Her call log was full of numbers I didn't recognize, many of them with long call durations. One number in particular stood out. It had been called every day of her trip, sometimes multiple times. My pulse quick in it as I copied the number into a reverse lookup site. The result came back almost immediately. It belonged to a man named Ethan Wren. The name meant nothing to me, but the implication was clear. Who this guy was? He had been a significant part of her business trip. I stared at the name on the screen, trying to make sense of everything. Was this some co-worker I'd never heard of? A client maybe? Or was he something more? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was piling up fast, and none of it looked good. I heard the bathroom door open, and I quickly locked my phone and shoved it into my pocket. Amy stepped into the bedroom, her hair damp and her face scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked at me with a strange mix of guilt and caution, as if she could sense that I knew something was wrong. You okay? She asked, her voice a little too casual. You look pale. I forced a smile. Yeah, I'm just tired. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than necessary. Why? Then she climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to her chin, closing her eyes as if nothing had happened. I lay down beside her, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. That night, I didn't sleep a wacky. I couldn't every time I closed my eyes, I saw the card, the lingerie, and that name, Ethan Reynolds. I knew I had to dig deeper, but I also knew I couldn't let her know I was onto her. Not yet. As the RST light of dawn ed through the curtains, I made a decision. I was going to ND out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I grabbed my phone and started making plans. If she thought she could keep this secret from me, she was in for a rude awakening. The next morning, I decided to play it cool. I couldn't risk tipping her off, not until I had All the pieces of the puzzle. Amy woke up as if nothing had happened, humming a tune as she made coffee in the kitchen. Watching her, you'd think she didn't have a single why in the world, but I couldn't unsee the panic on her face from the night. Before it haunted me. Over breakfast, I tried to get her talking, so any exciting stories from the trip. I asked, casually sipping my coffee. She froze for just a fraction of a second before ashing me. Her usual smile. Not really, she said, shrugging. It was mostly just work stuff, meetings, presentations, the usual, nothing fun. I nodded, pretending to belie her. Must have been exhausting it. Was, she said, glancing at her phone, but it was worth it. The client loved our pitch, and we might even close the deal next week. Her response was smooth, almost too smooth. I knew she was lying, but I didn't press her. Instead, I focused on my plan. I needed to gather more evidence, and for that I needed access to her phone. After breakfast, she headed to the shower, leaving her phone on the kitchen counter. My heart raced as I grabbed it and opened it. She'd always been careless with her passcode. It was still our wedding date. Ironic as that was. I quickly navigated to her messages, my fingers trembling. There it was, a string of texts between her and Ethan Reynolds. My stomach churned as I read the messages. Amy, I can't stop thinking about this weekend. It was perfect. Ethan, you were perfect. I miss you already, Amy. Me too. I hate sneaking around, but it's worth it. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The messages were explicit, leaving no doubt about what had happened on her so-called business trip. My chest tightened as I scrolled further, ending photos she'd sent him. In a hotel room, her in that same black lingerie. I couldn't look anymore. I locked the phone and put it back exactly where I'd found it when she came out of the shower. I pretended nothing had happened. I'm heading out for a bit, I said, grabbing my keys. Need to run some errands. Okay, she said, barely looking up from her phone. See you later. As I drove away, I felt a mix of anger here, trick, and determination. I wasn't the kind of guy to let something like this slide, but I also was impulsive. I needed to be methodical to make sure I didn't just confer on her without a plan. I pulled over in a quiet parking lot and called a private investigator. I'd never imagined I'd need one, but desperate. 8 times called for day measure. The investigator, or a man named Jack, listened patiently as I explained my situation. I'll take the case, he said. I'll need her schedule, any details about this guy, and access to anything you can provide, emails, phone logs, social media. I gave him everything I had, including the messages I'd seen that morning. Jack saw me. He'd start digging immediately and promised to keep me updated. As I hung up, I felt a small sense of relief. At least now I was doing something. Over the next few days, I acted like nothing was wrong. I laughed at Amy's jokes, listened to her stories, and even kissed her goodnight, all while knowing what I knew. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I kept reminding myself that the truth was worth the wait. Then one evening, Jack called. We've got something, he said, his tone serious. You're going to want to see this. The phone call from Jack had left me on edge. He didn't go into detail, just said he had something I needed to see, and insisted we meet in person that night. As Amy sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, I couldn't help but glance at her, wondering how she could sit there so calmly while keeping such a huge betrayal hidden. Every smile, every casual remark from her felt like another twist of the knife, but I played my part. I pretended everything was even though the storm brewing inside me was getting harder to contain. The next morning, I made up an excuse about a last-minute work meeting and headed out to meet Jack at a small diner on the edge of town. He was already there when I arrived. a manila folder sitting on the table in front of him. My heart was pounding as I slid into the booth. Across from him, "You're not going to like this," Jack said, his voice low and serious. He pushed the folder toward Demi, his expression grim, "But you need to see it," with trembling hands. I opened the folder. The RST thing I saw was a series of photos. Grainy but clear enough to maki out the faces. There was Amy laughing and leaning into a man I recognize. Ed immediately is Ethan Reynolds. They were sitting together at what looked Ed like a hotel bar, their body language unmistakably intimate one. Fato showed Ethan with his hand on her thigh. Another showed them holding hands as they walk Ed into the hotel elevator. My stomach churned, but the worst was yet to come. Jack pointed to a USB drive. "Tuck Ed inside the folder. There's more on here." He said surveillance footage from the hotel. It con RMS. Everything. I couldn't bring myself to watch it there in the middle of the diner. Just seeing the photos was enough to make my blood boil. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "From what I've gathered, Ed, at least a few months," Jack said. "They've been meeting up whenever she travels for work." This wasn't a one-time thing. I felt like the oar had been ripped out from under me. Months she'd been lying to me, for months, sneaking around with this guy while I stayed home, trusting her, loving her. The betrayal was overwhelming, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to think clearly. "What else did you?" and I asked. Jack hesitated. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling out a printed document from the folder. "It's a booking confirmation for a weekend getaway. Why she and Ethan have another trip planned in 2 weeks. Looks like they're heading to a resort in Miami." My hands clenched into STS as I stared at the paper. She wasn't even trying to stop. She was already planning her next rendezvous. The audacity of it made my blood boil, but I swallowed my anger. If I was going to confront her, I needed to do it on my terms. I needed to make sure there was no way she could wriggle out of this. "Thank you, Jack," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm raging inside. "You've done more than enough," he nodded, giving me a look of sympathy. "If you need anything else, just call, and for what it's worth, I'm sorry you're going through this." I left the diner with the folder and the USB drive tucked Ed under my arm. I felt like a man carrying the weight of the world, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. This was no longer about suspicion or guesswork. I had the truth, cold and undeniable, and now it was time to decide what to do with it. That evening, I sat in my car in a desert Ed parking lot, staring at the USB drive in my hand. I knew I needed to see the footage, but part of me was Terry Ed of what I'd ND. Still, I couldn't look away. I plugged the drive into my laptop and opened the list. The videos were time-stamped and arranged in chronological order. The RST clip showed Amy and Ethan meeting in the hotel lobby, their faces lighting up as they saw each other. The next clip showed them at the bar, laughing and talking like a couple on their honeymoon. And then there was the elevator footage, just a few seconds of them kissing before the doors closed. My chest tightened as I skipped to the NAL clip, showing them entering a hotel room together. The timestamp con rabbit. It was late at night, and they didn't come out until morning. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my seat, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. The evidence was overwhelming, but it also gave me a strange sense of power. For the first time in days, I felt like I had the upper hand. She thought she could keep this hidden, but now I had everything I needed to expose the truth, confronting her. Wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, but I also wanted to do it in a way that left no room for excuses or denials. She had lied to me. "I thought you mentioned something about Miami a few weeks ago." Her reaction was priceless. Her hand tightened around her mug, and for a moment she'll look Ed like a deer caught in headlights. "Oh, that S, not Conramed." Yet she stammered, "Ed, I'll let you know if it happens. Cool, I said, forcing a smile. Let me know, maybe I'll come with you this time. Her nervous laugh told me everything I needed to know over the next few days. I kept my poker face intact, pretending life was normal while quietly setting up my confrontation. I made a backup of all the evidence, the photos, the texts, the videos, and stored them on multiple devices. I even printed out a few key screenshots, just in case this wasn't going to be a screaming match. I wanted cold, undeniable proof that left her no room to squirm. Then came the perfect opportunity one evening. As she scrolled through her phone on the couch, I brought up an old memo. Why, hey, remember when we used to watch those true crime shows together? I asked, keeping my tone light. She glanced up, smiling. Yeah, those were fun. Why, I was thinking we should watch something like that again, see how people unravel mysteries, expose secrets. I let my words hang in the air, watching her reaction, her smile faltered slightly, and she shifted uncomfortably. Sure, maybe sometime, she said, her voice tight. That was the last piece of the puzzle I'd planted, enough doubt to make her uneasy, and now it was time to pull the rug out from under her. The following night, I set the stage. I invited her to sit down with me in the living room, telling her I wanted to have a serious talk. She looked curious, but not overly concerned. She had no idea what was coming as she sat down. I placed the manila folder on the coffee table between us. Her eyes darted to it, and I could see the faintest icker of panic in her expression. What that she asked, her voice shaky. Something I need to show you, I said, keeping my tone calm, but asked, I need to ask you something. Is there anything you want to tell me, Amy? Anything at all? She froze, her face draining of color. What do you mean? You know exactly what I mean, I said, my voice but controlled. I'm giving you one chance to be honest with me. If there's something you've been hiding, now's the time to come clean. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked like she was trying to come up with an excuse, but nothing would come when she didn't respond. I opened the folder and slid the photos across the table. These are from your business trip, I said, my voice colder now. Recognize even her eyes widened as she stared at the pictures, her hands trembling. I can explain, she stammered. Edo. I'm sure you can, I said, cutting her off, but before you do, maybe you'd like to see this. I pulled out my laptop and played the elevator footage. The color drained from her face completely. It's not what it looks like, she whispered. It's exactly what it looks like. I snapped. You lied to me, you betrayed me, and you thought you could get away with it. She opened her mouth to speak, but I wasn't done. I know about Ethan. I know about Miami. I know everything. Amy, so tell me, how long were you planning to keep this up? Were you just waiting for me to win out? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel the slightest bit of pity. This wasn't a moment for sympathy. This was the moment she had to face the consequences of her actions. Amy sat frozen, staring at the evidence laid out before her. The tears in her eyes spilled over, but I wasn't moved. This wasn't the time for her crocodile tears. I wanted the truth, raw, unedited, and without excuses. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. It just happened. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. It just happened. That's the best you've got. Amy, affairs don't just happen. You made deliberate choices. You lied to me, planned trips, snuck around. Don't insult me by pretending this was some accident. She looked down at her hands, wringing them together, as if that would somehow erase the weight of what she'd done. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she mumbled. Go this far, I repeated, my voice rising. You've been sneaking around with this guy for months, and you're already planning another trip to Miami with him. How far were you planning to take this? Were you going to run off with him, leave me behind like yesterday's trash? She shook her head frantically, her voice rising. In desperation, no, I swear. I wasn't going to leave you. You just, what I interrupted, slamming my hand on the table wanted. A little excitement, something different. Was I not enough for you? Her silence was deafening. She couldn't even look at me, and that more than anything else told me the answer I already knew. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything hung heavy in the air, suffocating. Nally, she broke the silence. I never stopped loving you, she said, her voice barely audible. I let out a bitter laugh. You don't do this to someone you love, Amy. You don't lie to their face, betray their trust, and sneak off to hotels with someone else if you love them. So spare me that line, because I'm not buying it. Her tears came harder now, and she buried her face in her hands. I don't know why I did it, she sobbed. I was stupid, Sel. I wasn't. Thinking that much is clear, I said coldly, but now it's time to think, Amy, because this isn't going to end with you crying and me forgiving you. There are consequences for what you've done. She looked up at me, panic ashing in her tear-streaked eyes. What do you mean? I mean this, I said, pulling out the stack of printed screenshots and dropping them onto the table. This is going to our lawyer. I'm ling for divorce. Her jaw dropped, and for a moment she looked like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Wait, no, she cried, reaching for my hand. We can work through this, please. Just give me a chance to make it right. I pulled my hand away, shaking my head. You don't get to make it right after months of lying and cheating. Amy, you've destroyed any chance we have had of working through this. I can't trust you anymore, and without trust, there's nothing left. Her sobs grew louder, but I refused to let myself feel guilty. This was her mess, her betrayal, and she needed to face the fallout. I stood up, grabbing the folder and laptop. I'll be staying at a hotel tonight, I said, my voice RM. I need space to go out my next steps. You can stay here, but don't expect things to go back to normal. This is the beginning of the end. Amy, as I turned to leave, she called after me, her voice cracking. Please don't do this. I'll do anything, just don't leave. I paused at the door, glancing back at her one last time. The sight of her broken and desperate should have hurt, but all I felt was numb. You already left, I said quietly, the moment you chose him over me, and with that, I walked out, closing the door behind me. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to clear my head. The emotions swirling inside me were a toxic mix of anger, betrayal, and hatred. I had never imagined my life would end up here, blindsided by the person I trusted the most. Amy's pleas still echoed in my head, but they only made me angrier. She didn't care about me, she cared about being caught eventually. I pulled into the parking lot of a small roadside motel. It was cheap, dingy, and exactly what I needed, somewhere to be alone, away from her. I checked in and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the folder I'd brought with me. I opened it again, zipping through the evidence. Every photo, every message, every details, solid. My decision, there was no going back. Amy had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The next morning, I called a divorce attorney. Why, his name was Alan, and he came highly recommended by one of my co-workers. I told him everything about Amy, about the affair, about the evidence. He listened without judgment, then laid out my options. With the proof you've got, this could be straightforward, Alan said, but it depends on what you want out of this. Are you looking for a clean break or something more? I thought about it for a moment. Part of me wanted revenge to make Amy feel the same pain she had caused me, but another part of me just wanted it to be over. I want a clean break, I said, Nally, but I won't let her walk away unscathed. She has to take responsibility for what she's done. Alan nodded. Fair enough, we'll start drafting the papers today. Do you have a place to stay for now? Yeah, I said, Though the motel hardly felt like a place to stay, I'll manage. After hanging up, I felt a strange sense of relief for the RST time. In days I had a plan. I was in T, just wallowing in my miser. Why I was taking action. Later that day, I got a call from Jack. "There's something you should know," he said, his tone serious. "Ethan's wife found out about the affair." I blink. Ed caught off guard. He's married." "Yup," Jack said, "and his wife isn't taking it well. She's threatening to go public if Amy doesn't back off." A bitter laugh escaped me. The irony was almost too much. Amy wasn't just destroying our marriage, she was wrecking someone else's life to let her go public. I said, "Maybe Amy needs to feel what it's like to have her world crumble around her." The days that followed were a whirlwind, but not in the way I had expected. Alan moved quickly with the divorce papers, and I ensured Ed everything was ready to go. Amy, meanwhile, seemed like a shadow of her former self. Her confident, bubbly demeanor had vanished, replaced by a quiet, desperate sadness. She tried to apologize again, but I held RMI. "Can't do this anymore, Amy," I told her during one of our last conversations. "I deserve for better. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. I'm done being your safety net." Her tears didn't affect me anymore. I had spent too many sleepless nights mourning the life I thought we had, but now I was ready to let it go. The divorce process was surprisingly smooth with the evidence I had. Amy didn't get me on anything. We split our assets fairly, and I walked Ed away with the house. Ethan's wife, as it turned out, did go public with the affair, and the fallout was brutal for both Amy and Ethan, but that wasn't my concern anymore. What surprised me the most, though, was how freeing it felt to let go of the anger and betrayal. I realized I had spent years in a relationship that wasn't as solid as I thought. Losing Amy wasn't the end of the world, it was a new beginning. I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies I had long neglected, and started focusing on my own happiness. For the RST time in years it was in TZ, there were still moments when the pain crept back in, but those moments grew fewer and farther between. One evening, a few months later, I found myself at a coffee shop reading a book and enjoying the quiet badass. When I met someone, Rachel. She was sitting at the table next to mine, struggling to balance her coffee cup and laptop in a hand. I asked, smiling. She laughed, her eyes lighting up. "Thanks. I swear, I'm usually more coordinated than this." We started talking, and before I knew it, hours had passed. Rachel was kind, funny, and easy to talk to for the RST time in what felt like forever. I felt a spark of hope as we exchanged numbers and said goodbye. That evening, Ed, something I wasn't broken anymore. Amy's betrayal had hurt, yes, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was stronger now, more content in who I was and what I wanted out of life. Moving on didn't mean forgetting what had happened. It meant choosing to focus on the future instead of the past. And as I walked Ed out of that coffee shop, I felt lighter, freer, and ready to ember what came next. Sometimes life throws curveballs that force you to reevaluate everything, but in the end, those challenges can lead to something better if you let them. My story didn't end with betrayal, it ended with a fresh start, and for that I'm grateful.